To pray, there's no angels where I go, only pieces that are broken, scattered dreams across the floor. I'm home.
It's funny. Things were actually nice there. I can't tell you exactly what happened, let alone how I became this thing once more. But I do at least have one thing to say to you all. Hello. I can finally see you. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Maybe not. Am I an anomaly? Something created outside of my own universe? Put in it? Just as a sick joke? A misplacement in reality? In time, in space, and everything else? I can't say for certain. I don't get the answers to my questions. The only things that drive me crazy. The only things that drive me anymore. The only things that let me know something inside me is still human. Alrighty, hello everybody. This is Kira's show here, and that was quite a bit in the intro. So, for those of you who have been curious as to the SCPs I'm going to be putting in this series, I already have my own list. Second, I literally watch a lot of SCP stuff, not just anime. I can actually consider myself to be a fanboy, because I wrote down a lot of numbers on this paper in front of me, and I confused myself because I knew exactly what they were, but I had to find the names of the SCPs to write them down so I would not forget. Some of them are actually very complicated. I got SCP-187, 3812, 294, 1762, the saddest SCP I've probably ever seen, and a little bit more. For those of you who are curious, the last one, here be dragons. Now, let us begin. Whenever we last left off, Midoriya and his brother, they have gotten a bit more of their questions answered. And, well, they themselves were put into a containment chamber. The only reason why they know the Foundation won't be messing with them is because Midoriya altered something in the O5 Council members' mind. The simple fact that they exist is already a threat to the SCP organization. However, he put in the person's mind that they are simply children, and that they have not gone through the childhood god stage. So, the SCP Foundation is going to believe that they can use these two reality benders as powerful assets to them. In fact, he even put the idea in his head of letting them go through some SCP tests. Now, with that being said, we do have Dr. Chloe, who, after showing her clearance to the guard, got through, opening the door behind him and going into the chamber. The room. As soon as she walked in, she saw that it was a very different place. In fact, it was quite odd to see. Midoriya and his brother altered the containment chamber to look more like a regular house, the one that they used to live in with their mother. Now, she is actually watching as Midoriya is eating breakfast still, as he brings a spoon into his mouth and holds it there, bringing his hands up once more and just beginning by throwing his hands outwards, expanding the reality. As he can see millions of little dots in front of him. Chloe, however, she does barely see anything there. She can see a few of the galaxies, a few of the nebulas floating there, as they're all strung out across the kitchen. And as soon as Midoriya gets done by plucking something out of the system and simply tossing it to the side, he brings his hands outwards and smashes it all back together. Before freezing for a second, looking behind him and seeing Dr. Chloe, who has a lot of questions. While Midoriya's brother, he got out of the shower and just got done changing. Walking out and seeing Midoriya, who simply just asked the question of what is he going to eat this morning. He thought about creating some bacon and eggs, something at least like that. Or probably some pancakes, just like how Mom used to make. Now, with that being said, Chloe does have a few questions about what she just witnessed. Midoriya and his brother simply looking at each other for a second, before having a telepathic conversation. The look on their faces is going from, should we explain this, to, oh shit, to simply Midoriya looking angry and pissed off, while his brother looks sincere. Midoriya is then going to a bit more of a, okay, fine, I'm done with your BS. I think everyone knows that look. And Midoriya simply gives her an explanation. She just witnessed him create a new galaxy in that one. And by looking at the history of it, he simply saw that that galaxy would explode or implode and cause a lot of damage in the ones surrounding it. So he plucked it out of the air and threw it to the dark. It won't be needed. Now, the doctor is very curious about this situation, asking what Midoriya means by will not be needed. Now, Midoriya simply tells her that nothing really good happens to that galaxy. By the time sentient life can form in it, it dies. So he doesn't want those in it to suffer. The doctor, not understanding this phrasing. This boy is young. From her understanding, he shouldn't have this level of awareness over life and death. However, for a reality bender, yeah. It's not very good either way. The Foundation believes that they can control them and use them for good. The doctor then saying that after his brother has eaten, they can begin some test. In fact, it's kind of difficult. But we do at least have one task we want you to do. In fact, actually, I do believe that we need to get it done right away. Do you believe that you can come with me, Izuku? Correct? Yes, and sure. Midoriya waving off his brother as he walks out of the room. And him and the doctor are escorted to another place in the facility. Midoriya looking through and around the area. The place is certainly big, and it's very curious. He's at least found some information on some SCPs, things he hasn't really heard of before. And, well, he walks into a room with a singular piece of paper, talking about the possibility of an SCP. Now, Midoriya sits down and begins to try and read the article. Tries to figure out exactly what it's supposed to be of. And surprise, surprise, the paper itself is deteriorated and old. Midoriya, from thinking about it, thinks that this piece of paper might simply just be years old, if not decades. Then asking the question of exactly what is it supposed to be. The doctor explaining that this is a record of an SCP. However, it does have its own unique and odd properties. The SCP Foundation, we begin to observe these creatures, and in fact when we first discovered them, we noticed that their numbers slowly started to die off, until our initial incident that led to their extinction. The information we have on these creatures is limited, and every day it deteriorates. The file in front of you is of SCP-2256. Their unique property is that they are their own giant self-contained secrets. And the Foundation was unaware of them for a while. So, we were hoping that you might be able to stabilize this and actually find the records we have and put them back together. Piece them back together, I guess we could say. Most of the staff members that were involved in this, they were either mind-wiped or, well, died due to other containment breaches. So, would you think you could done? I'm sorry? Yeah, it took me a little bit of time, but while you were talking, I spent a couple years looking through things. A couple years? I'm sorry. A couple hours, I guess you could call it? I'm not too sure. My depiction of time isn't as it used to be. Okay, so you're saying you experience time differently then? Yes, I do. The doctor then writing that down, along with at least getting some people in to check on the records Midoriya restored, and seeing what they have. From what they can tell, the records may not be deteriorating, and only the words Midoriya wrote down were restored. In, well, I guess you could say brand new pen. Now, after that, Midoriya does leave, and walk around a bit more, asking about exactly where they are anyways, and what this place really is. The woman sitting in it right now, they are somewhere, well, undisclosed. I guess I could tell you since you're going to be working with us and you might want to know. Right now, we're somewhere underneath the Atlantic Ocean. This facility is designed to house a couple Keeters. And in fact, one particular one, I believe that would be too dangerous. In fact, this site is far too dangerous to even be allowed anywhere near land, around the general public. Now, I believe that we do have another SCP here. The woman is just beginning to look on her files, and look through things more. The boy is a reality bender, so hopefully this doesn't go how she thinks it will. The O5 Council, they only authorize this test because there's 2 reality benders that they could use. If they lose this one, they have another one. Sad? Yes. Dark? True. And they decide to put Midoriya into SCP-106's chamber. Now, Midoriya does walk into the room and see the giant containment cube. Confused and asking exactly what is he supposed to do here. The doctor informing Midoriya that the SCP in question here is one of the hardest to contain they've ever seen. It has its own ability of a pocket dimension, and it could simply go there if it wants to, but it can only go there in the dark. It also produces this unknown corrosive material that rusts and deteriorates metal, which leads to its escape and usual murder of quite a few Foundation staff. We would like to understand more about it, and as long as you don't put yourself in too much danger, we believe that we can do that. We do have floodlights stationed to be turned on. and once they do, they'll be put up to over 1000 lumens. So the pair of goggles I did hand you will need to be put on at all times. Do you understand? Alright. Now, Midoriya puts on the goggles, and then at least brings his hand up, flicking his wrist a little bit, and the foundation at least catching that. Confused. Midoriya expanded the radius of the shield he has around his body. If anything comes into skin-to-skin contact with him, or even makes contact with his skin, it can immediately be dispersed or destroyed. And Midoriya decided to at least expand that a little bit and tweak it. He can now nullify whatever comes into contact with him. However, this is an unknown entity, and it is slashing, correct. So he did at least have the idea to add a quirk to his arsenal. One durability-based quirk. It may not look like it, but his skin is now as hard as any metal surface. Midoriya going a bit further and actually putting it more up towards the higher levels of platinum. Or not platinum. Titanium, I guess you could say. It's a bit of an odd mix between the two, along with the fact that it might have a bit of the diamond in it. If the SCP does try and slash against Midoriya's skin, this armor he gave himself should work to protect him. And it should be as unbreakable as diamond. Now, Midoriya gets ready, as he warps reality a bit. The entire containment room, including the observation deck, somewhat shifting a little bit, you could say. As Midoriya, he walks straight through the walls, and simply into the containment chamber. And SCP-106 looks at Midoriya a bit confused. The room is mostly flooded with lights, as he begins himself trying to attack the young boy. Him going to slash at Midoriya before at least tackling him to the ground, and trying to push him into the goo on the floor. Midoriya actually being a bit more panicked, before realizing that his armor is intact. And instead of just trying to wish the entity away, he does what he needs to. He can at least prove that they are very, very useful. And if the SCP organization does try and terminate them once again, he can promptly just leave the reality. Leave this plane of existence and find another one. So, let's see how things go here. Now, Midoriya is pulled into the pocket dimension, and he is a bit confused whenever he does look around. Just standing there and spinning, he can see multiple doorways and multiple pathways, as he can hear 106 screaming, and at least trying to catch up to him, you could say. Midoriya picking a path and running, as he just starts to run through the entire place. Now, 106 is annoyed. He thought he hurt his prey, that he could have a bit of fun with this. So, clearly he cannot. Trying to actually pull Midoriya in deeper into this dimension. Midoriya, whenever he does see his hand wrap around his leg, he simply brings up his other leg, smashing it directly into his hand. If he was human, that would have been broken. However, the entity simply just recoiled back into a pit of goo, and continued on trying to stalk Midoriya, waiting until he was either slowing down or weakened. Midoriya running in every other direction he can think of. He runs upstairs, downstairs, sideways, well, really anywhere. This dimension doesn't seem to be ending, until he falls. As soon as he does fall, he finds himself in a bit of an odd place. A place that has not been recorded by the Foundation. This SCP has its own pocket dimension, and he can manipulate things inside of it. Midoriya simply just looking up as he finds himself in the dirt. In the Great War era. Things around him are exploding and he can hear quite a bit of gunfire, along with planes passing by overhead, bombing things. As Midoriya looks up to what he sees, a bomb flying directly at his face as he just stands up, and brings up his arms to block it. It's smashing directly into him, and exploding, as the SCP begins to throw out wires, trying to wrap this around Midoriya. One of these wires wrapping around his throat and trying to dig into it, and pull him back. Midoriya simply just increasing his weight, increasing whatever is underneath him, and turning the area into solid metal, welding his feet to the ground. As Midoriya, he's gaining a bit more mass, and he simply just brings his hands up and rips the wire from it. Rips the wire off of his throat as he just turns around, turning his waist, staring directly at the SCP, telling the old man that that was a neat trick, but he has a few of his own. He was supposed to learn about this place. That doesn't mean he can't have fun. Midoriya throwing out his hands, and closing his fist, as planes begin to fly overhead for Midoriya, and troops begin to surround the area, as they just begin to open fire on everything inside the dimension that isn't one of their own, along with Midoriya taking control of the wire, beginning to attack the SCP and try and restrain it, along with actually plucking one of its planes out of the air, using telekinesis and flying it directly into the SCP, smashing downwards with it, as the SCP tries to lunge towards Midoriya from an unknown pit. Midoriya is simply just turning around and grabbing it by its throat, before smashing it into the dirt, and the mud, and the blood, before simply just beating it across the face, telling it that it thinks itself to be a powerful hunter. But it is not. In fact, I've been stopping you from breaching containment. You have your own pocket dimension. I put this entire room into mine. The room you can't get out of. That you shouldn't get out of. A proper prison. As Midoriya simply just stands up, throwing his hand outwards and smacking the entity away, as it gets sent flying across the battlefield, and smashing into the ground before rolling into one of the trenches. And Midoriya simply snaps his fingers, as he's standing there right in front of the containment chamber. The doctor asks Midoriya if he is ready to proceed, to which he takes off the goggles, telling her that he got plenty of information, and that he put this area back to where it was. The doctor confused. Midoriya was simply standing there for the last couple minutes. She thought it may be nerves or something, but apparently not. So, they begin to question him and get him debriefed. And, well, surprise, surprise, they got more information about the old man than they have in a very long while. They were unaware of the effects that he had in his pocket dimension, and what he can simply try. Midoriya making the story that he simply just ran through it, and any time that he encountered the SCP, he used his abilities to cut it off, or manipulate the place so that he can get through more. That's when the entity began to show its real powers here. And, well, he leaves out the part about his fights in his encounter, simply stating that whenever the entity tried to bomb him or hit him, he left, and came back here. However, Midoriya does try and act a bit more shaken up about this, and ask if the testing is over for the day. To which the staff, well, they kinda agree. The boy's been through a lot, and he's actually done quite a bit more for the Foundation in the past day than any researcher or D-class has in a while. In fact, they kinda do want to see exactly how much this boy can do for them. Thinking that they can play Sycamon 682 or 096. However, that's a bit more out of the realm of possibility right now. In fact, now that they're thinking about it, they believe his name was Dr. Clef. He might be the reality-bending hunter. And if they can probably get him back in line or bring him back to the man he used to be, he might be a powerful asset that they can have on their side. Sure, hunting down reality benders is bad, but if they can start bringing them on their side and work with them, they can curb one of the problems the Foundation has. Now, with that being said, I do hope you guys enjoyed, and have an amazing day. I'll catch you guys in the next part.